Okay, I can throw the forum open to questions now. Any questions?
For the last speaker, is it possible to manage the area around the dams to increase runoff into the dams?
Good question. We did run the Wollongong trial from about 2006, I believe, and until about 2 years ago. So it was a catchment binning trial that we ran with Road Forum, who probably a lot of people know here. It was cancelled. What we found is that the runoff wasn't significant, and there were, I guess, significant community concerns from the binning aspect. So it was sort of trying to balance those two. I think one of the
concretely, couldn't you?
if you visualise the catchment, you know, I guess it's those trade-offs. I think the issue had been, you know, do you keep investing in the reliance on the dams when they're failing? So that's happening.
To follow on that question, does the operation consider the value of the catchments is justified?
In terms of the maintenance, I think. I think one of the issues is that it still has been a relatively short period of time that we've experienced the significant reductions. We certainly feel that the dams are still necessary. Obviously, we're still getting some inflows. On average, we plan for between 80 and 100 gigalitres from the dams. I think Perth is relatively fortunate to have reasonably pristine catchments in that regard, although they are carefully managed. So that's not a resource we'd like to throw away. There's also other value, obviously, in terms of maintaining that. Most of them are locked up in bush forever in terms of land planning. I think there are some catchments, though, where potentially we would look at deep reclaiming them, and we have started that. So Logue Brook, for example, we've deproclaimed the Wellington water supply. So where we feel that there's no reliance or the water quality is simply not a position that we would ever want to rely on it for a public water supply, we are progressively deproclaiming some, but I'm not aware of any broad scale expectations of that in the Perth metropolitan area.
I don't know what the impact of private bores, and there's also bores that people use government to get more of the park. What is that a serious problem?
Yeah, in terms of managing the overall resource, it's something that Department of Water manage. But to give you a sense, I think there's about 170,000 garden bores in Perth. I guess our feeling is if they can be sustainably managed, that they do provide a good, local, safe, fit-for-purpose source. And if we didn't have that, all of that demand would come onto the scheme, or a lot of that demand would come onto the scheme, and then you're looking at desalination and other options to replace it. So our view is if they can be well managed, carefully managed, and our understanding is that that is happening, it's an appropriate contribution. In terms of, and it's really the same for local parks, there's about 60 gigalitres a year, I think, is used in groundwater for local parks throughout WA. And again, if that wasn't happening from that, a lot of the wastewater treatment plants in terms of recycling capacity is starting to come up to capacity, so there's not necessarily recycled water available. So groundwater does play an important role there.
Any more questions?
Yes, question for you. Thanks very much for providing us some things that we should know and take care about, which seem to be inevitable change. What might be a trigger to change that pattern in the future?
Yeah, that's a question that I'm really trying to understand the answer to. It was interesting that it mentioned, for instance, bringing back the rain by just planting some trees along the coast. Sue and I discussed this at length, and I guess it doesn't fall into a particular category. It's too big for the water hole, and also the catchments themselves are locked away for not just for water for people, but also for animals and plants. You know, I mean, I was horrified when Jenny said about concreting the catchment.
That was a joke.
I know. But I don't know. I honestly have to tell you that I have no idea how to change people's views. because it's democracy. One thing's for sure, I mean, starting a war or being sort of aggressive seems to appeal to people. I mean, Abbott's popularity's gone up through the roof at the moment. And then you have $400 million being spent on killing a bunch of woodlands, and compare that with people who have to pay medical expenses at home. It's hard to know, but it's democracy, so people have the right to have an opinion. How to change that opinion, I think, through education. Waterwise, I think it's a very good program. The Millennium kids, we have very close links with the Millennium. They do a good job. There's a long haul, you know, kindergarten to adults. It's a long haul.
Kevin, Christian,
Yeah, well, yes, I could probably partly answer that question. It's coming back to question one is coming back to the Swan River, and you sort of indicated there probably would be engineering solutions to fix the problem, but we don't have a means of demonstrating how important the Swan River actually is to our cultural environment,
Well, again,
how do we do that?
In Singapore, they basically decided to put a barrage at the mouth of all the estuaries and use the estuary. Swan River would be a great water resource for the water column. The moment it's a bit salty, but certainly if you combine it with the talk on desalination, it could be done. But whether we like it or not, we're going to have to face the Fremantle problem. If sea level rises by half a meter, there'll be lots of people underwater. I'll be okay on a riverfront property, but not quite higher up. It's something that we need to think about, and this 20-year plan or 30-year plan is really absent in Western Australia totally. And then, you know, also the deep Yarragadee south, there's 1,000 years worth of water down there. At 49 cents to 50 cents a kilolitre, if you compare them with the desalination cost. Paul Allardyce said he was going to use desalination when he came back from his farm. Alan Carpenter, not to be outdone, said no, Labour Party's going to do desalination. And Jim Gill told me he read it in the newspaper. Even though the Water Corp had already got ready to use deep water. This is the key question. If anybody has any ideas how to change people's, or just open their minds, I guess you don't even change it, but just open them to different possibilities. That's why I really enjoyed the other two speakers, because they were, the first one you got up about using desalination for agriculture. I thought it was crazy, but the end of the talk was really interesting. So we need to open our brains and our minds.
Next question.
Probably more on probably more on some of your global comments. I think it was Jefferson when they were formulating the Constitution for America. I think he said the main thing was we've got to develop a system where people are happy, but your graphs show that we're such a lucky country, we should be happy.
That's right.
But of course, like every developing country, we're becoming a throwaway society, and in doing so, we're developing more and more on our resources and impacting more and more on our environment. And one of the things, of course, we're seeing is that the thing that is catching up with us is probably global water resources, and maybe this is going to be one of the areas where we're going to have to start regulating our behaviour to.
Well, we could just move to the Kimberleys, not to where I'm there. But you know, one of the fastest growing industries in the world is cosmetic surgery. And I gave a talk at Stanford University about this, and there's a woman in the audience. And I asked them, you know, why 90% of this is women changing their looks. Why are you doing this? You're doing this for the guys or yourself? I couldn't get an answer anyway. And it's maybe this peer pressure, this relative poverty that Norman Swan talks about so much. Why do we respond? You know, the thing that people forget who don't come from a country like Germany, like I do. A leader needs followers. Don't ever tell me that things are changing because of leaders. Leaders are just reflections of the people's will. So if everybody got up and said in Germany in 1939, this is enough, you know, go away. There would have been no war. If in Australia you said certain things like Elizabeth Key or any of these other things, enough's enough. You wouldn't have it. One person cannot control people. At an advanced stage with military force and police and so on, okay. Before that happens, people just get up and say, enough is enough, people. And we all say the same thing. Things will change.
I'm very glad for the Department of Water. I have a question for each of the three speakers can answer. My observation is that you all spoke about have we got the overall objectives right. Obviously, we've got some of the means of achieving some of those right, and Meredith talked about the overall portfolio of meeting those right. So I'll ask the question: have we got the objectives right in Australia, both for overall water resource management in general? And I'll just give an example, since you all mentioned about the Israeli Water Commissioner, one before you might get some work. In Israel, they're very focused on security. They're also very focused on food security. So when they look at achieving their water objectives, yes, they have desalination, but desalinated water goes first to human consumption, and then the water from that goes on to agriculture, to be able to use specifically to grow agricultural crops, to be able to meet food security objectives of Israel. Whereas here in Australia, I don't think that we've got quite clarity of objectives. And furthermore, some of our cheapest water, like this groundwater, which can provide the water tap at 10 cents a kilometre, goes to the people with the greatest capacity to pay. And people are prepared to pay $3,000 a kilometre for water. So each of you can answer the question: have we got the objectives right? Have we got the means right in terms of what we do with our desalination of that? And we've got the overall portfolio right.
Well, we certainly haven't got our objectives, but we don't even have any objectives. I mean, we're just thinking about minerals, pulling it out of the ground, and getting rich and getting more people to make the rich rich. There hasn't been a debate in Western Australia about what this beautiful country can do for us. And I think that's a shame. You know, the farming community added so much value. If you cut the mental health cost by 10%, you'd save probably the whole budget of the water corps. And you can do that by planting a few trees and teaching people how to live. So I think your question doesn't have an answer. We haven't actually had a debate in Western Australia. What are the objectives for the Swan River? What are the objectives for our life? I thought Perth was pretty nice at 400,000 people.
Too many of us coming here. Well, in terms of water use, and particularly in agriculture, I think it's a question of numbers, because Australia is quite dry. It's the driest continent on the planet outside of Antarctica, which nobody lives there. And at the same time, we probably use the most water per unit production what we do. And it's just, if you travel through Murray-Darling, for instance, it's just amazing amount of water is just pouring over but even here in Harvey, you see this flood irrigation, because it was one farmer per large area and just all resources available. It's not really, as you were saying, it's not really in the blood to say water, because it's one person per huge amount of the area. I talked to, when we worked on this project, we had one guy from Valoriza, he's from Poland, and he was saying, you cannot kind of compare the production of wheat, for instance, because if you're in Poland, the wheat is this high, is this size of the grain, and here you have this much and this grain, but the territory is such that you cover by the area by this vast area of agricultural production. So it's just numbers working in different directions. I'm a very new person in Australia, only here for 12 years, and in a way you just really, I live in Ireland, for instance, when you have for 30 square kilometers, there was, on the catchment I work, it was 60 farms. When I came here, it's just you can fly over one farm for a couple of hours. So I think this is these huge resources which are available for few people make us less sensitive to how we get into this tipping point. When it's become too late, when it's become what Jörg is talking about, when it's become really breaking environment as such. So in a way, I think this is require this paradigm shift that it's not forever and it's not endless, it's not limitless. I think this is where a lot of this issue are happening because nobody counts in drops. It's just too easy. A lot of water.
In terms of the objectives,
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Yeah.
sorry, I got confused. In terms of the objectives, I think and you might be aware that West Australia's water resource legislation is literally 100 years old. It was done in 1914, and a couple of things have changed in the last 100 years. So I think that as we move into the era of reforming that legislation, which is on the agenda, there's some things that I'd like to see. I think that there needs to be some express recognition of the importance of environmental water provision, which I think has always been a little bit questionable in terms of West Australia's water resource legislation. I think that there's a real opportunity to lock that away. I think that we really need to look at, particularly for regional areas, there needs to be some priority given to water for communities, because it's not a given that there's water available for communities in the future, particularly when you're competing with high value industries such as mining, oil and gas and so forth. And I think that should be, that recognition is not something we should take for granted, and I'd like to see that in the legislation. And the other thing that I think that should be expressly prioritised in the legislation is the importance of water efficiency for all sectors, and I think that should be tied to metering programs, to compliance programs, to reporting, to transparency about who's using water for what. So from my perspective, I think the objectives in our legislation were right 100 years ago, but they really need modernisation. I think that's agreed, and the proof of the pudding will be in what actually gets delivered in that legislation over the next few years.
Can I just add one more point to your question? If global warming proceeds even at a minimal level, we're going to have 500 million refugees on our doorstep. We have a moral responsibility, I think, to do something about it. 500 million. That's a big issue.
Okay, Elaine, please.
I think attitudes can change. It doesn't have to be through disaster. If you think back to South Africa, you must have wondered, why was it that without absolute coercion, suddenly universal franchise was brought in the certain knowledge that the ruling powers had to lose power. And it was due to one man that happened, a scenario planner, who spoke to terrorists, to the government, to farmers, to everybody, going around for a few years, and he made it absolutely clear that either you took the high road or the low road. High road, there would be peace and economic prosperity perhaps. The low road had to be civil war and all whatever accompanied that. And people became aware of it. They all spoke of him and went forward, and both Mandela and de Klerk. I've just said to him, without you, it could not have happened. Now here, I don't think people are aware. If we knew, to the best of our knowledge, we've got X gigalitres of water, that means our population must be so many if we use current amounts, which is probably less than the present population. Otherwise, we've got to decrease it. Put it in understandable, basic terms, starting off from what is. So,
I certainly didn't want to imply I thought that we had this out. I was conveying the thoughts of leaders around the world. But you have to also recognize the game has changed. And I'm not sure whether you can There's so many obvious solutions here in Western Australia that people don't take. So there was a threat of disaster in South Africa. And last night there was a show on television, I didn't see it, but my wife did, about competitiveness in Australia. Some of you might have seen it. And we have a great weakness in getting our act together. And from invention, we're very good at inventing a few things, but we're then to commercialize them. So our society is actually really handicapped by a lack of cohesiveness. Illustrated by an example a couple of years ago when there's some cockatoos sitting on golf greens. And the police and the EPA decided the only humane thing to do was to shoot them. So the cops went out and shot these cockatoos. But then the cockatoo came into my backyard and talked to me quietly, and he said, "You notice all these people are invasive species." And he thought the only humane thing to do was to shoot them. You know, we have a lack of ability to get our act together, I think.
I'll make that the last question. No one's mentioned bringing water down from the north.
Not yet.
It seems to be it's getting wetter up there and drier down here. There's a case for considering bringing water down from the northern part of the state.
Well, there's a new scheme available now that Richard Thorpe came to see me the other day about having a series of small tanks. If you think of the tree, I'm going to have to drop this microphone because I need 2 hands. Maybe I can, no. A tree has the same amount of water in it all the time. So when it rains, if you multiply the rainfall by the area, it's a huge amount of water. Well, it's certainly not coming down the Swan River or anywhere else. It's going into the ground like a tank. And then the tree pumps it out and passes it on to the neighbor. Well, his idea was to have a whole series of small tanks, 2 or 3 meters across, 50 million of them around Australia, with solar panels on the top. And he's done some calculation. I have a student working on this. So it rains, the rain goes in there, or it floods, flood goes in there, pumps to the next tank, next tank, next tank. And so instead of having a desalination plant, we have a series of tanks that take the rainfall from the coast to Mandaring and get that infrastructure back. And it's looking pretty feasible. This is a very cheap option of distributed water harnessing. And if you combine it with planting some trees, the Swan River will be back. The problem with desalination plants that I have personally is that it doesn't do much good for the wheat belt farmer. But today my mind was opened a bit, so I was really pleased to hear that. If we brought rain back, I think that nature, certainly doesn't do much good for animals, cockatoos and so forth. And I have a very strong view also for the university should make an example of not clearing that land, And there's a lack of willingness to stand up because the government now is run for the shareholders. It's no longer run for the people. If you elect somebody, it's irrelevant who you elect. They're responding to shareholders of a company. And that's something that's very difficult to change.
If there are any more questions, I can take one more.
Can I say one little thing? I was listening to Sue Murphy a few years back, and she was talking about inertia. If it wasn't English population who came first to Perth, but it was Italian or French, it probably would be completely different topics of conversation today, because we wouldn't have green lawns and rose gardens as it's kind of remnants of home for first settlers, and it could be completely different way of water management in this place. So it's really, we can go as far as for settlement for your issues and maybe something.
Well, I think we should take a leaf out of indigenous peoples' way of handling things.
Okay, well, I think it's time for me to bring proceedings to a close. And offer some things.
Thank you very much.
Together.
Extremely interesting and insightful contribution,
Some of the slides.
and it really shows our appreciation. As a mark of appreciation from the society, I present each of them with a centennial issue. So, on each room.
I thought we were going to get a bottle of wine.
Finally, to our sponsors, Dr. Max and the Floating Wetlands Australasia. We will help to make this event happen. That will be Dr. Lynn Middle. To you in the audience for being here tonight, I hope you enjoyed it. And we wish you a safe journey home tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.